What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Recover Out Loud, episode number 67. Today we got a pretty awesome guest from Orlando, Florida. Never been there, super cool. But from Orlando, Florida, we got Bekah George. How you doing, Bekah?
Doing well. How are you?
I am great. It's a beautiful morning, sun shining. It's not too hot right now, so
Yeah,
I'm happy.
It's already hot here, so it starts hot in the day in Florida. So
Oh goodness, you wake up to that heat.
always, and the humidity, it's nuts.
What is the temperature right now?
I think it's like 85 already. So yeah, it'll be probably 100 today.
That's what we get. That's what we get in the summer.
Yeah, no, it'll probably be at least in the 90s for sure.
Oh no, thank you. I'm good. I waive my right to exist in that kind of heat.
It's nice in the winter though, because the winters, you go at Christmas to the beach and it's like 60, and that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's some give and take to it. Right. So, Bekah, would you like to give a formal introduction of yourself?
Absolutely. So I am a public speaker. I'm a mental health therapist. I'm a coach. I'm a mom. Basically, I have been in the mental health field for 15 years and just have a really big passion of being able to help people, specifically to overcome shame and trauma, limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome, things like that holds them back from being the best version of themselves. So I started on a one-on-one basis with therapy, doing clinical therapy, went to coaching to try to do a little bit more where I could coach multiple people at once. And then I decided I wanted to speak about it and really be able to challenge people to step into their level of greatness. And so that's what I'm doing now.
It's awesome. It's kind of why I started doing what I'm doing with the podcast. I was in a place in my life where I wasn't the best human being I could be. Some things happened, and then something happened, and then kind of stepped into my role after I got into recovery, and this is where it's led me. It's brought me to this point where I'm able to talk to people like you and other people that bring something to the table that like to open up that conversation about the more taboo things in our society, right? Mental health is a huge taboo. I mean, everybody wants to talk about it, but nobody wants to talk about it, if you know what I mean.
Exactly. Yes. There's still all the stigma about therapy and things like that just blows my mind in 2023. Like, why is that still a thing?
Absolutely. And the mental health resources that we have now versus what we had 20, 30 years ago, I'm pretty sure even when you started, has changed a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's get into it. What was it like in some of your struggles prior to getting into counseling?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been in counseling for 15 years. And so when I got out or when I got into it, I kind of was just a naive kid. I was like early 20s, I just finished grad school, really just wanted to help people. I just wanted to, I went through some childhood trauma myself and really just wanted to be able to help kids was kind of my goal. And I got into it and quickly learned that kids are not for me. It's not my thing. I just got too sad. I specialize in sexual trauma. And sexually maladaptive behavior. So a lot of both the perpetrators and the victims of sexual crimes, and working with children was just too sad for me. So then I started going to adults. And basically I had the normal struggles of like I said, childhood trauma and things like that. And then got divorced early on, which we were actually pastors. And so I don't know if you know much about how the church handles divorce, but it's not very good. So it was a lot of judgment and shame and how dare you get divorced as a Christian and things like that. And so that kind of spiraled me into a bad place for a long time. Also, I was always overweight. I was always obese. So I've been big my whole life. I remember, I always say I came out the womb chunky, like always. I remember being 6 years old, like having to go to Jenny Craig because I was always overweight. And so I ended up getting to 330 pounds is my heaviest weight. And so, hating myself on top of a divorce, on top of all these other things led me to an abusive relationship. And in that place, I was I was in a really bad place because I was like, I'm doing therapy with people, helping people, but I'm in this abusive relationship where I'm not allowed to drive. I'm not allowed to talk to people. I'm not allowed to have any friends. I can't, like everything is controlled at everything that I do. And I just thought, how did I get here? How did I get into this situation? And so that was kind of like the lowest moment of my life, honestly. And that was about 2.5 years ago when I was like, well, if I don't get out, he's going to kill me. And that was kind of that moment of change for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I can only imagine, some of the mental struggle that you went through while, working with kids, and the perpetrators too, because that has to be heavy. You have to. I mean, I know a lot of people say don't go home with your work, but I know for me, I would bring that home for
Yeah.
sure.
I mean, working with little kids that had just been so victimized in such terrible ways, I started thinking that, the world was not safe at all, which it's really not. But I just started really like having nightmares all the time. I couldn't handle it. And then I went to work with the perpetrators and I learned a lot. And I'm glad I did. But I also started seeing everyone as a perpetrator at that point, because it really is crazy how, it's not just some creepy guy in a van that is these perpetrators. Like some of them are really attractive and charismatic and successful and all these things. And every person I met, every man that I met, I was like, he's a perpetrator, he's a child molester, So I realized I had to get out of it. It was just too hard for me not to, especially having a daughter. So at the time I had a little girl. Now she's 13, but at the time she was little. And I was like, I can't sit here and be with these 5-6-year-olds that have been raped and treated terribly, and just awful things, and then go home to my 5-year-old and look her in the face. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, that has to be rough, absolutely rough. And you're right, that it could be anybody, and
Mhm.
and that's hard. What are some of the stigmas that you yourself seen when you first entered into the mental health field?
So there's a lot of stigma about just therapy, just going to therapy. People will say things like, oh, yeah, you're crazy if you have to go to therapy. Or, people make self-deprecating jokes about themselves if they are in therapy, where it's like, oh, I'm psycho or I'm nuts or whatever. And it's like, actually, everyone can benefit from therapy 100%. None of us get out of this life without trauma, like it just doesn't happen. So, that is a big one. Medication is another one where people, they are so embarrassed to even say that they're on depression medicines or anxiety medicine, or, they won't get on medicine to help them in any way. I mentioned being a Christian. So in the church, that's another thing where it's like, oh, let's just pray it away instead of getting mental health, help. Right. Also, there's certain things because of what society says that like we can't always talk about, right? Like where people say that they don't feel safe to even come to therapy and talk about. So like when I was working with the perpetrators of child molestation and things like that, a lot of them were like, when I started realizing I needed help, I didn't know where to get help because I couldn't talk to anyone about it without the crazy judgment or the, somebody wants to kill me or whatever kind of thing. So there's just a lot of things that, people just are ashamed of and they don't want to speak about, and shame grows in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I know one of the things that I faced when I stepped in the field was the whole not being able to talk about a thing. And
Mhm.
I'm a veteran. You've seen it in
Yeah.
the video. I'm a vet, so that adds another layer of complexity onto the already existing. You're a man. You can't talk about it.
Yep.
And so I know when I stepped into that realm and I was like, oh, I need to talk about these things. I noticed really quickly, like feelings are scary, emotions are scary,
Yeah.
especially when you can't when you haven't been properly taught how to focus that in a direction
Mhm.
and really be able to work on that.
Yeah.
I don't know if this was something that you faced, but did you face any kind of biases when you were in, like, did you say, oh, I can't believe in this, or I can't work around this because of a bias that I have?
So great question. Yes, absolutely. So there are certain things that I know about myself that I know that I can't necessarily be objective, right? Like there's things that I'm like, man, this is just not like if some of my trauma from my childhood comes up, if it's a scenario in which is the same, I'll dip out because it's just too much for me emotionally. I know that it spirals me down into a bad place, right? But as far as biases of what I believe, there are things that I draw a line at where I say I can't be objective because of what I believe. I don't usually share those or talk much about them because in the psychology field they are you can't really have those biases. Like, you can't say, hey, this is something I'm uncomfortable with, because you're supposed to be comfortable with everything, right? And so that's actually been a really big area of contention for me because with my faith, there are things that I have to say like, hey, this is not something I believe in. Doesn't mean I don't love you or care about you or want the best for you. But as far as like what I'm okay with doing, it's difficult. So, so this is actually an example. There has been times where, people wanted me to endorse children changing, genders, right? Like, are you endorsing this? Whatever. And that is something that I'm comfortable saying, absolutely not. Like, these are children, they don't know what they want yet, right? And so those types of things I have to recognize that, you know what, if you want to do that, you need to go to a different therapist. I can't be the one who says that, because for me, it's actually like it goes against everything I believe to say that, yes, this little, girl can become a boy at 7 years old. So those are the types of things that I realize I can't do. And so I respectfully bow out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I think those boundaries are healthy to have, right? Especially like if it goes against your faith. And I think a lot of people get the lines blurred when it comes to some of the more sociably acceptable things in this world now
Mm-hmm.
versus what our core beliefs and faith structures really look like. And
Absolutely.
so I'm glad that you said that, and I'm glad you stood up for yourself. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. And like I said, in the psychology field, because people think that if you don't agree with something, you're a bigot. And that's just not true. Not in my case anyway. I'm definitely not. And I have no problem with people. I love all people. And it's okay to agree to disagree. But as far as me putting my name on something or saying that I'm okay with it, or even being objective or being the right therapist for you, I'm just, sometimes I have to be like, I'm just not a right fit.
Yeah, absolutely. I know in the recovery field for me, medically assisted treatment for MAT, so the
Mm-hmm.
Suboxones and the methadones and the Vivitrexat, that was huge for me. Like when I first got in, because when I short little thing, my path to recovery started in jail, and so I seen a lot of people abusing Suboxone in jail.
Wow.
When I stepped out, I started seeing people saying, "Oh, I'm taking Suboxone to get clean and sober," and I'm like, "That's not recovery, right?
Mhm.
Like, no." But then I met, I got in contact with one of my best friends who just so happened to be in recovery. He was using Suboxone, and I straight up said, "I was like, no, man, you're not sober, you're not clean." And he was like, "Well, the dosage that I use has significantly changed since I started, and I don't want to be on this the rest of my life." And I'm like, "Wow, it really works if you're working it." So
Yeah.
that's one of the few biases that I had.
Yeah. And I understand that. I mean, I actually worked in a rehab center for a while and I felt the same way. And I think I've seen some that really do abuse the Suboxone, in which case I've seen people who have been on it for 20 years. And I think that's not okay. But yeah, the ones that are, able to stair step it, that's great. Good for them. But I love that you recognize like where your limits are. And I think that's healthy, like you said.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the other big things surrounding you, and we talked about it a minute or two ago, was boundaries.
Yeah.
How big have boundaries been in your workplace for you? And then, stepping into your personal life.
Well, as a therapist, there's some very rigid boundaries, like we're not allowed to be friends with our clients afterwards. We're not allowed to ethically, there's just certain things that we have to do as therapists. But then just recognizing that I have to have certain boundaries to stay mentally sane, honestly. Like this is a really exhausting job mentally, right? I hear people's stuff all day. I sit with people during like the saddest, toughest times of their life. And so really I've had to learn how to leave it in, there and come home and like not think about it. Now there's those times where I'm like, I can't shake it and I can't get away from it. But that's one of the reasons that I don't work with kids anymore, right? That's one of the reasons I don't work with the perpetrators anymore for sexual abuse, because it just wasn't something I could take. I had to take it home. I did every single day. I would think about these little kids. And so really it's the boundary of like, I'm going to shut my computer off at this time. I'm going to shut my mind off at this time, and I'm going to move on to something else and just, say a prayer for them or think of them, but I'm not going to continue to let it, take over my life. Also, I've not been very good at like taking vacations and getting away, because I always feel guilty about, either because I'm a single mom. And so like, the money thing is difficult, or I feel guilty about like, well, I don't want people to have to go a week or two without therapy. So, I don't always do it. And so I really tried recently to, I have a vacation scheduled in September. I'm really excited about it. For the most part, I have struggled with that. So I really am trying to take my vacation and utilize that, and those types of things. So that has been a big piece of it. And then just learning boundaries in relationships now that I told you I left that relationship 2.5 years ago. And so learning now how to communicate what my boundaries are in healthy relationships and dating now. In my personal life, and trying to figure out what that looks like as a person who believes in themselves now and who actually has confidence and who, doesn't hate themselves anymore. So it's just a lot of relearning past behavior.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you find yourself ever? And I'm a peer. I do peer support work. Do you ever find yourself when you're talking to friends, you're talking to family, and you're hearing some of the things that they're going through, and you automatically go, "I can help you." Do you do that? And you're like, "I can help you. I can fix your problems."
My friends a lot of times will call me and just be like, hey, can I just like, what do you think about this? Or whatever. And so like, I do sometimes hear that stuff and I'll think of it, but I try when it comes to my friends and family to back away and not diagnose or not, have anything
Yeah.
to do with it, because I can't be their therapist, right? It's just not right. And so I have to try to not do that, but it's ingrained in who I am. I've done it for so long that, I will ask things like, even my daughter, I'll have a conversation with her and I'll be like, okay, so how do you communicate your emotions effectively in this, in this? And then she would be 4 years old. And I remember one time she was 2 or 3 and she yelled and she took her blankie and she said, I don't want to use my coping skills. And she just screamed, and that's just how I had taught her. What are your healthy coping skills? And she has a list of them. And so, it's just who I am, but I try to be cognizant of that and not be annoying. And even when I start to like date people, they'll say things like, don't psychoanalyze me or don't therapize me, and I'm like, I'm going to try. But when your trauma comes up, I'm going to be like, ooh, hit a nerve right there,
Yeah.
But I do sometimes diagnose people out and about. Like I see somebody at a post office is a total a-hole and they'll be like, yeah, you're this or that, right? Like I will like come up with something in my mind for sure.
Yeah, I try to tell people, friends that start to come to me as with needing suggestions or advice or just somebody to talk to. Right off the bat, I said, "Look, dude, you're talking to Sean, your friend, not Sean, your peer."
Yeah.
Right? like this is the boundary that I have, dude, and you're not paying me for my time right now.
Yeah.
We're friends, so
Right. I
there
love
it
that.
is.
And sometimes I'll ask, like, even when I'm working with a client, if I've been with a client for a really long time and they ask me an opinion, I'll say, are you asking me as a person or are you asking me as a therapist? Right. Because there's completely different, like my personal opinion may be different than what, I should probably say as a therapist. So I'll ask. And even to my friends, I'll say the same. Would you want my professional opinion or do you want my personal opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. And stepping into the realm of like ethics and stuff like that, I found it hard, and I don't know if you found it hard, but after working with somebody for a long time and you start to like, get that connection with that person, and you have to separate it and be like, okay, look, like I can't be your friend, right?
Yeah.
As much as I want to be your friend, as cool as you are, I can't be your friend. Has that been like an issue for you?
Oh, it's the hardest part about therapy for sure. It's not as hard when you just worked with someone for like 6 months or something, but I have clients I've worked with for 4 or 5 years that are really hard. I've seen them grow up. I've seen them, do so many things. And it's like, man, if we had met in any other scenario, we would be besties. You know what I'm saying? So it's really hard to not do that. With coaching, I'm a little bit more lenient than therapy. Obviously, therapy is very clear lines, but with coaching, sometimes I'll be like, hey, you know what? I can coach you into this next area of your life, and then we could potentially be friends in the future. Just may not be like best friends, but we could definitely stay connected. But obviously with therapy, it's very, hard, fast line. But I always wish them well and always secretly hope I run into them so I can see how they're doing. But it is really difficult.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest times for me was because of what I do. I do a lot of groups. I work with justice involved veterans, and it just so happened one of the veterans that came to me that said, "Hey, look, I need some help," and I pointed him in the direction of the program I used to be in. I used to work with him in the army, and so like when he came to me, I was like, "Oh, I want to be your friend so bad, right? Like I didn't like you then, I like you now. I want to be, but I can't." And
Mm-hmm.
that was really one of the hardest things. And he's successful now, and I'm happy for him. But at that time, I was like, man, I wanted to be your friend and say, get it together, let's figure this out, but
Yeah.
I couldn't. It was rough.
Sometimes people get really offended. Like you're not even supposed to, like there's ethically all these rules about like you can't accept a gift over $25 and you can't do these things. And so sometimes people will like for Christmas, people would come in and bring me like $100 gift card and stuff. And I'd be like, thank you, but I can't really accept this, and they would be offended because they're like, hey, I know this is a place you like. I've seen you eat it before or whatever. You've had, like, I thought of you when I bought it for you. Why can't you? And I'm like, it's just not like, I just can't, So it's hard for people to understand that. And it's like, look, it's not because I don't like you. Like, I think you're delightful, but I just can't, I can't go there.
Yeah. Oh, that was another big one. I lived in Alaska prior to moving here, and the native tribes love to bring in gifts.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and when it's cultural, that's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Especially
yeah,
when they take offense to like.
yeah. You can really make people offended. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
another thing I've found is that when a man opens up to me and starts to talk to me, they start to feel like they're falling in love with me, right? So then they'll say things like, I think I love you. And I'm like, no, you don't. You just have never been vulnerable with someone
yeah,
before. And so now you are thinking you love me. That's not how it works. So then I have to be very clear about that boundary, and usually I have to change them to a different therapist. And that's really like offensive for them because they're like, I was just vulnerable and told you that I'm in love with you. And I'm like, you're not really in love with me. And now I have to change you therapist because we can't do this,
yeah.
So that's a whole other boundary. But I think it's because they've just never had that level of intimacy with someone where they share all of their life with them. And so then that feels like love, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a tricky thing. That's a line. I've never encountered that, and I'm glad that I haven't. But I can definitely see that. When we do start to open up and talk about those feelings and emotions, it gets directed somewhere.
Well, most
Um,
likely women are more comfortable talking about their emotions.
yeah,
So you probably wouldn't have that as much as men don't really talk about their emotions as much. Like you said, there's a stigma with that. So I think when the man does it for the first time, it's like, oh, this is amazing. Whereas women are much more used to it. So it may not be as intimate for them.
yeah. I have feelings. What?
Right. Men are like, wait, I can share this. This is so crazy, and it's a safe place. And I'm not going to be judged for crying, and I'm like,
Yeah,
crying does not equal weakness. That's okay to
yeah.
cry.
Yeah, you actually when you said that, it reminded me of the movie Step Brothers, where Will Ferrell went into counseling and then he was like, "I love you."
Yes.
He's like, "No, you don't. I love you." So yeah, when you said that, I was like, "Oh my god,"
Yeah,
that
exactly.
reminded
Exactly.
me just of that. But what does self care look like for you? Because self care for me, it's a huge part of my everyday process. But the role that you play and what you do, it has to be so much more.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it is like putting in boundaries of like, I really, for about an hour after work every day, I just decompress. Like, I don't talk to people. I don't talk to, like, unless I absolutely have to, I don't take phone calls. I don't do anything. I just decompress and think about the day. And I think about what I could have done differently, what I'm proud of, what I'm not proud of, those types of things. I kind of just finish out, like give my day closure, so to speak. Usually it's on a drive. I have like a 45-minute there and 45-minute drive back to get my daughter. So it's like an hour and a half in the evening. So usually it's that where I use that time to decompress. And then I also love to do things like, I'll do manicures every 2 weeks. I do pedicures every 2 weeks. I shop probably way more than I should. I recently got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, I've lost 130 pounds since my biggest size. So being able to, do those things now. And so, I love martial arts and boxing and things like that. And that actually makes me feel strong. It makes me feel capable. So I love to do that as well. So it's really, and then also just spending a lot of time with friends. I moved here 2.5 years ago, like I said, and so building a community has been hard because I work from home for myself. And it's difficult in your 30s to make friends, so I've really had to be intentional to be like, okay, I'm going to choose friends and spend time with them because otherwise it's easy to isolate.
Oh, absolutely. Look at you. You're going to be a black belt in no time.
Hell yeah. It'll take me a while, but I'm doing it. It's changed my entire life, honestly. Like, it's been so incredible for me.
That's awesome. What has Brazilian Jiu Jitsu done for you, like your mental health and stuff like that?
Honestly, it has helped me to realize that I can be anything that I want to be. Like, I was clumsy as a kid. I broke so many bones. I've broken my thumb multiple times, like you can see it crooked. I've broken this hand, this wrist, my leg, like all kinds of things. And it's because I would always fall. And so, I was picked last in gym because I was overweight and clumsy and all the things. And nobody will trust me to like hold things, right? Because they think I'm going to drop everything. And so I always said like I could never be good at anything, specifically physically. Like, there's just no way. And Then recently I was at the eye doctor a few months ago, and he diagnosed me with a really rare eye issue where I have, I can't see depth perception. So he was like, you're not actually clumsy. You just can't see how far the floor is from you. And I started sobbing because for the first time I realized I'm not clumsy and stupid. I just can't see. Like, it was like that big of a thing. And so all of a sudden I realized, what other names have I put on myself that I don't have to accept? And it was like ripping off hello, my name is clumsy. Hello, my name is worthless. And I like ripped it off and I ripped it up. And I was like, what else can I put on? And so in BJJ, I've been able to say, like, maybe I could actually go and compete, right? Like maybe I could, I can be strong. I can be athletic. Like whenever I leave, I feel that way, even though I'm still get my butt kicked every single day because I'm only a white belt. It's still amazing and it's so incredible. So it's definitely given me that confidence to be like, maybe I could be really good at this and just change everything about me. So it's confidence, strength, ability, also just feeling comfortable in the uncomfortable, because I don't know if you know what those positions are, but a lot of times you're in a pretzel position with somebody you don't know, mostly men, because there's only like 2 women in my class, and so I'm like in this position with this 250-pound man where I like, it's like very awkward and weird. And I remember the first time being in that position, and my partner looked at me and he was like, the sooner you become comfortable with being uncomfortable, the easier this is going to be. And I was like, that'll preach, because that's how it is in life, right? So it's taught me so much, and I've only been in it like 6 months.
Yeah, it's crazy. This topic of uncomfortability, it's weird because it keeps coming up, right? Um, I said it in one of my groups the other night. Guest prior to you said it. You said it. It's been a topic of like my conversations lately is getting uncomfortable in the situations you're in. Not necessarily completely uncomfortable, right? In recovery, you have to be uncomfortable because I mean, obviously you're changing the way that you think, the way you act, the way you live your life, right? But also, being okay with that uncomfortability and changing that. And so, thanks for sharing that. That's
Yeah,
huge.
of course. I just, I'm excited to see what happens in the future and what, who I become, honestly, because it's just mind blowing looking back on where I was 3 years ago.
I'm excited for you. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, public speaking,
Yeah.
how did you step into that realm?
Honestly, it was on accident. Like I started sharing in some domestic violence circles, right? Which most of those aren't like, broadcasted. Of course, it was just people reaching out, being like, "Hey, I know you just got out of a domestic violence situation. Can you come talk at our place?" And as I started giving kind of some speeches about that and encouraging people to leave and how to do it and the safe ways to do it and the mental health pieces of it and all of that, I realized like, wow, because of my history, my background, and because of my story, there's power here in what I can help people do. And people would come up to me and be like, I was able to get out of this situation and get away from my abuser because of you. And I started getting emails and messages, and it started making me realize like, this is life changing, and honestly, a big piece of it was, when I connected my weight with shame, right? Like I realized that I thought that my weight was always just my weight because I was genetically predisposed to be big, which is somewhat true. But I also, mainly it was shame, right? So like at a young age, I started eating and started gaining weight, and then I would eat more to make myself feel better. And so when I started realizing that like the pain, the weight I was carrying around was actually shame and pain, it changed everything and helped me to heal and helped me to realize like, I don't have to hate this body. It's just pain that I have to heal, right?
Yeah.
So as I started speaking about that, people started realizing like, oh, I guess I didn't even know that I had shame. And a lot of people don't think that they do. And so it really was cool to see people connect and be like, oh, I realized I haven't made that step in business because of shame or because of limiting beliefs, right? Which boils down to shame. Or I realized that I'm in unhealthy relationship patterns my whole life because of shame, right? And so once people started coming out into that like freedom, it started making me realize I want to share my story everywhere and share how people can do this because it's so life-changing.
Absolutely. How was it the first time you shared your story? I know what it was like for me. How was it for you?
It was hard. Specifically with domestic violence, like I think my fear was he'll find me. He will, kill me for saying it, those types of things. And I still sometimes think about that because I'm on podcasts and I know he still looks at my stuff. But the other part of me is like, I can't live in fear, and it is what it is, So I think it was that fear, that initial fear of like, what is this going to be? Also a lot of fear of judgment as a therapist. So I've gotten a lot of judgment of like, you didn't see the red flags. Why didn't you leave earlier? Things like that. And I know people are just confused. They're just unsure. And if you've never been in a domestic violence situation, you don't know. But it is really hard to hear because it's very judgy and it makes me just want to scream. So I was also really afraid of that, which did happen. So I was nervous about that. And also just nervous about what are my family going to say? What's my friends going to say? Like that type of thing. Because some of it I do share and say, like, I didn't feel like a lot of my family and friends helped me. I didn't feel like a lot of them were there for me. And so I was like, some of those people could be really hurt by that. But at the end of the day, this is my story and this is how it is. And it's part of it. And so I have to say, like, all I can do is say my story. And if somebody gets offended about it, I will talk to you about it and I love you, but that's all I can do.
Absolutely. And I think people forget that before you're a counselor or a therapist, you're a human being, right?
Absolutely.
And you're allowed to mess up, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to not see those things because we're human. We don't see those things all the time.
Yeah.
I know for me, like when I shared my story the first time I was terrified.
Yeah.
I was in a room of 40 strangers I didn't know. And when I got done sharing my story, I was like, oh, here we go. Here it comes. Here comes the rain. And I got met with nothing but love. And that was amazing. And I mean, there's been times where I've shared my story and people had, scoffed at it or, said what they were going to say, but they weren't ready to receive the message. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's absolutely okay.
It's terrifying. I mean, it honestly is, but you really can't, you can't let those few people or those few negative situations or potential negative situations keep you from helping other people.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, 100%. So you talk and share about guilt and shame, and you gave us a little bit about the origins of your guilt and your shame. How when you look out at the people that you share your story with, how often do people come up to you and say, "Man, I can relate because I deal with guilt and shame," or I've never really known that I had guilt or shame until now?
A lot of women will identify absolutely have shame, right? Because body image is one of the biggest things in regards to shame, right? Body image and sexual abuse. So I talk about sexual abuse as a kid in my story. And 1 out of 3 girls is sexually abused by the time they're 18. 1 out of 6 boys are right now is the number. So a lot of women will come up and be like, I resonate with that. I was abused myself, or I resonate with that because I hate my body and I've struggled with my weight and that causes me to have shame. I found a lot less men do that. And after I start kind of digging in with them a little bit to figure it out, then they realize, oh, I do have shame. I just didn't know that's what it's called. Right. So an example of that would be and this is me, I'm a woman, obviously, but I recently I moved into a house, which I went from literally having, when I left my abusive situation, I had two suitcases in a box. So I went from that to an apartment to a house in Orlando, which is double the price of Indiana. So I'm doing well and I'm making my way back to a life, right? But I didn't buy the house. I just rented the house. And I had a friend say, congratulations on buying your house. And I didn't correct her. I said, thank you so much. And I stopped and thought about it and was like, why did I say that instead of saying, no, I'm just renting? Because I have shame that at 37, I don't own a home, right? So when I say that kind of type of thing, men are like, oh, yeah, I do actually have that, right? I do have the shame of I feel like I should have more money in my retirement. I feel like I should have more of this or that, or I should be more manly, or I should be, whatever the thing is. That's when they start to connect it. The other piece of it is I'll say something like, okay, if you want to figure out what your shame is or what you're carrying around, what's an area in which you've tried to make progress and you haven't been able to? Typically, there's some kind of limiting belief there. And when that boils down to shame of some sort. So to answer your question, women a lot of times will identify, but men, you really have to do a lot more digging.
Oh, absolutely. I always seen the body shame that women hold for themselves, and it never clicked for me until last night. I was watching the show, and this woman was like, I feel this about myself. I feel that about myself. I don't like the way that I look. And my girlfriend was like, she's a beautiful woman. What is she talking about? And I said, yeah. And then I was like, it clicked, something clicked. And it's like, we all have this image of ourselves, and so
Mhm.
I've said it multiple times. I'm like 5'5". I'm so ashamed that I'm not taller, but that's out of my control,
Yeah,
right?
but that has caused a lot of shame for men.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm short, and a lot of some women put like height preferences on who they like because of the feeling of security, and that's
Yeah.
okay, you know. But that was a bit of shame for me, and I had to work through that. I just last night something clicked where it's like women hold shame on their bodies,
Yes.
and that's terrible.
Yes. And that's why I'm passionate about. I would love to go to universities. That's my next plan and hope is to go to universities and talk to young girls about their body image and the way that they see themselves. Because if we can catch them early, it's huge. And that's actually, I started a nonprofit this last year as well, called On Purpose Ministries, that is specific for girls 13 to 17, teaching them about their body and their worth, right? And not like comparing themselves to girls on Instagram and all of the, edited versions of what they say that they should be, right? Because I know how much it messed up every aspect of my life. And I really want to help people in that. So women have so much shame when it comes to their body across the board, that women are like, yes, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's very, very noble. Get to them at a young age and say, "Hey, look, you don't have to be that supermodel." And I don't know that that's the direction, but my thought process is not saying that you'll never be that, but you should want to be a different version that honors and loves himself.
The best version of yourself that you can be, whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to
Absolutely.
look like what your best friend looks like or what the model that in front of you looks like, or what Instagram says you should look like. And even just like sometimes I tell people they have to grieve the loss of the expectation of what they thought their life would look like as they get older, right? Like I have to grieve being 37 and divorced and not in a relationship, right? Like I have to do that sometimes. I have to grieve the loss of the years that I had in abusive relationships. Like there are things that were like, man, this is not how I planned my life out to be. But then you realize that if you don't deal with that shame, it just continues to perpetuate. And so you've got to like deal with it head on, or you'll end up in the same patterns over and over again.
Absolutely. With the grieving, though, are you celebrating anything?
I am celebrating like the strength that it takes to come out, right? Like I celebrate like the fact that, I was in a situation in which I honestly hated myself enough where I had planned to kill myself as soon as my daughter turned 18. My plan was to end my life. I had an idea of exactly how I was going to do it. I had it all planned out. And so I celebrate the fact that, that I'm here and that I'm strong and that I'm, not in a place of wanting to end my life in any way. I don't do any self-harming behaviors like I used to. I'm not in toxic relationships like I used to. I celebrate the fact that like I have a voice and that it can be heard now, whereas before I didn't feel like my voice even mattered. And then also I believe that pain gives birth to purpose. Anytime a woman gives birth, there's going to be pain. Like you can't have a birth without pain. And so I believe this actually is my purpose. And it's literally like a fire shut up in my bones that gets me excited in the middle of the night that I want to share about. And so I think that I'm like, hey, even if it just helps one person, it's totally worth it. So I celebrate that as well.
Absolutely. So, what is in the future for Miss Becca?
Well, like I said, I'm really hoping that I can start speaking at some universities. Would love to get connected to people who can help me do that. High schools, things like that. That's my next goal. I do want to go full time to speaking. I think that's going to be like what I really want to do. I am working on a book right now. It's almost done, so that should be coming out here in the next few months. Also, I do a lot of like coaching when it comes to shame. I have a package that is like let's do 3 different 90-minute sessions and just dive into what your shame looks like and how to overcome it. So I do that as well. So I do a little bit of everything, but really the speaking is the way that I really want to be going, and just like authoring books and things like that. So right now, my first story is it's basically about my story out of shame and like what that looks like and how to also overcome shame, and limiting beliefs and imposter syndrome. But the next one will probably be more towards young girls, and like more of like a journal type thing. Eventually, I want to have it to where they can come for weekend retreats and things like that, and can kind of pour into them and teach them about body image and self-esteem and things like that for weekends at a time. So that's my long-term goal. But we will see.
You're. I have encountered so many people that are writing their story, and sharing them in book form. And I'm actually working on it myself.
Awesome.
I had a friend say, write your story, and they didn't even know that I was writing it. And I was like, you know what? You're right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm working on that, and I'm working on reading other people's stories so that they can get some feedback and stuff too. So that's awesome. I'd love to read your book.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll
I would.
definitely let you know when it's out.
Sweet, sweet, definitely, definitely. So, before we wrap it up, what advice or suggestion would you give to somebody that's currently struggling in their life with guilt or shame, or just needing to break away from an abusive situation?
Yeah, so real quick, I want to define guilt and shame so people know like the difference, I think. So guilt is a lot of like I did something bad and I don't want to do it again, right? Like there's some benefit to guilt. That's a good thing. Shame is I am bad, right? So it's like when the guilt turns from I did something bad to there's something wrong with me. And so I just wanted to like, define that really quickly. So if you are finding yourself feeling like there's something wrong with me or I'm not worthy, I'm not loved, I'm not good enough, like any of those things, that's based in a fear. It's not based in a fact. And we have to start challenging that. So the first part of it is identifying that you have it, that there is something there that may hold you back. And then the second part is getting some help, whether it's a therapist or a coach or whatever, like finding someone who can help walk you through it. Because we have to do life with other people. We can't just do it by ourselves, and a lot of times when it's deeply rooted things, we really have to have help pulling those roots up, right? And when it comes to an abusive relationship, I definitely just want to speak to people to say, like, you are worthy of being treated well. And that, it is better. Obviously, there's some scenarios in which are really dangerous, but it is better to fight and get out than to stay and lose your soul. Because that's really what it feels like is you're losing every bit of you, and just that I just want to remind somebody that, they're worth it. They're worth being in a relationship, that they're valued and treasured and treated well. And, that there is life on the other side of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, Becca, where can we find you?
Yeah. So
Not physically, but where can we find you on social media?
yeah, I mean, I'm in Orlando. No, but
Yeah.
you can find me. I'd love to connect with people. You can find me on Facebook at Bekah George, and it's with a KAH, so BEKAH George. You can find me on Instagram at the Real Bekah Dawn. So DAWN is my middle name. So the Real Bekah Dawn. You can find me on my website if you want to book me for speaking or talk to me about like potentially coaching. That is bekahdawn.com. And so any of those things you can reach out, let me know. I would just love to connect with you, hear your story, and yeah, just love meeting people.
Absolutely. Well, Becca, I want to say thank you. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure having you on the show,
Thank you
sharing
for
your
having me.
sharing your experience. You are an inspiration to me. I hope you know that.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, thank you, and everybody. I want to say thank you for hanging out with us and listening to Becca share her story and share her experience and what she's doing now. Highly intelligent woman, very hard go getter, and I can't wait to see you get that black belt.
Absolutely. I'll
You're
invite
gonna
you to the first tournament.
sick, sick, nasty. Alrighty, okay, everybody. Till next time. Much love. Be good.